Hi everyone, it's Dr. Ramani and welcome back to this YouTube channel on narcissism, narcissistic relationships, and healing after narcissistic relationships. So red flags, right? This is the conversation. What are the 5 red flags? Tell me the red flags. Maybe that's the tricky bit, is we keep looking for red flags, and maybe that's not the way to do it. Maybe it's time to stop looking for red flags. So what are you supposed to do instead? So instead of looking for red flags, what can you do? How about you pay attention to how you feel? Now, I know we've taken on this topic in many different ways on this channel, but I can't put too fine a point on it. And I think it gives you a connection to yourself that can really be a very useful tool for you for discernment. Listen, I see the TikToks and the Instagram posts and the other videos and the news articles. 5 top red flags, 10 flags you need to know, 6 flags to identify you're in a relationship with a narcissist, this list, that list. Listen, for most of us, if someone did these red flag things within the first few weeks of a relationship, many of us would run away. But red flags don't tend to work that way. They tend to be subtle. They tend to be a very light pink that slowly turns to red. They take a minute to unfold. They may be nonverbal, and they tend to be peppered in to what feels like a relationship that's nice in some ways. Red flags are specifically tend to refer to the beginning of a relationship or a turn in the road of a relationship. Exactly at a time when it's about love bombing and idealization and seduction and excitement and feeling good. So the red flags tend to get peppered in there with the good stuff, and they aren't the only prevailing state, which is why love bombing is so confusing, because there's maybe a few pinkish or reddish red flags popping up, and the good stuff pushes us to justify or rationalize, because especially in those early days, at a minimum, lots of people want the relationship to keep going. So what else can we do about staying on top of some of these earlier signs that a relationship may not be healthy? Why don't we try a little bit of somatic awareness? I don't even call this intuition, though you may experience it that way. But it's something that you might feel in your body. The proverbial hairs that stand up on the back of your neck. But it may not just be that. It may be a discomfort in your stomach, a tightness in your chest, a constriction of your throat, a discomfort that you just can't name and that you try to shake off. Just about any survivor of narcissistic abuse will think back to that time. Just do that for a minute right now. Think of one of the more impactful adult narcissistic relationships in your life. I mean, even a childhood one, if that's what works, but this tends to make a little bit more sense in adult relationships. Close your eyes. Think about as you started to feel more aware in this relationship that something wasn't right. How did you feel it physically? How did you talk to yourself about that feeling? Most of us don't give enough credence to these feelings. We may want to write them off to butterflies in our stomachs or fear or anxiety rather than, my body is telling me something isn't right here. I need to slow down. And of course, there might be all kinds of structural factors that are operating. You may feel pressured to make a relationship work, or you may like some things about this person, or you may feel an obligation to stick it out. So you may just push away these feelings or even pathologize them. Oh, I'm so paranoid. I need to stop this. But your body picks up that sense that someone's not really safe. Listen, those feelings, those bodily feelings, even came up for you in childhood if you had narcissistic parents, but it was a much higher stakes game then. That was a time when you didn't have the luxury of knowing what this bodily feeling meant. To view a parent as bringing up red flags, a kid doesn't know what red flags are. That's a whole tricky thing, right? For a child to feel there's something wrong with the parent feels disloyal. They may have a primal fear of losing the parent. They may fear punishment. But those detectors we carry in our body, they're even there for kids. I remember thinking, I'll tell you about a story about my childhood. I remember there's an adult in my neighborhood who made me very uncomfortable as a child. I physically felt that whenever I saw this person. And even when I'd walk home, I'd cross to the other side of the street when I went by that house. I didn't have a word for it. I just didn't feel safe. This person actually never harmed me. I also never went into situations where I saw the person was, even when other kids were going there. And when the situations would arise where this person would be, I would go home or ask to leave. And to my parents' credit, they never questioned why I would leave those situations. And they'd just say, okay, let's go home. I never shared the discomfort with anyone, but I felt it in my body. And that same bodily sensation, interestingly, is something that I felt when I encountered so-called red flags in adulthood as well. I wish I had been as clever as I'd been as a kid and done whatever the freaking equivalent was of stepping to the other side of the street then too. How do we feel these sort of early signs and signals in our bodies? We have to pay attention to the sensations in us. Sometimes they parallel the very same feelings we might feel in an empty parking lot at night when we hear something, or in some other place when we feel at risk. It doesn't mean you have to get up and leave, though it could, but it does mean you slow down, perhaps cross to the other side of the street, as it were, and listen. Instead of trying to figure out if someone is looking at their phone too much on your third date, or talking about their ex-girlfriend too much, or interrupting you too much, instead of focusing on that, tune into yourself. It's not foolproof, and some of you may say, meh, I don't think I felt anything physically with my ex, but explore this a little. It may be a way of steering you away from this idea of sifting through these so-called red flags and instead tuning into yourself. So if you really try this, you might say, yeah, in some cases I did feel that physicality. Some of you might say, with a narcissistic ex, I didn't feel it in my body until things really started going south, but you did start feeling it then, and then still had to face the idea of what was hard for me to listen to in that. It might have been those practical factors that sort of sunk in. But I have to say that ahead of thinking about it, breaking it down, looking at checklists, if we really pay attention to that, this doesn't feel right. It comes up pretty quick. Sometimes it comes up right away. And it doesn't mean we get up and leave a conference room, but it could very well mean we distance ourselves, don't get into idle chit-chat, and end the conversation as soon as possible. Thanks again.